drugs, guns, and money.
Okay, so let's shift gears to our second topic, Dan. So for those that don't know, obviously I was born and raised in New York, but have since been adopted by the state of Nebraska. I don't really know how that happened, but I guess I'm a Cornhusker. So quick background, Dan and I spent a lot of time. We did our first and only, because it was kind of weird, emergency Instagram live when the Nebraska players sued. So eight Nebraska players sued to have the Big Ten return way back when. This was at a time before the Big Ten obviously uncanceled itself. But it was an interesting 8 players suing a conference. Also really doesn't happen that often, speaking of stuff that doesn't happen. So, obviously the Big Ten came back and lawyers were involved. We had Tom Mars on the podcast, which was a podcast that we'll say incensed, not incensed, maybe like, it was like the rising factor. It unified all of the different Big Ten schools, the 14 schools. And it caused them to really kind of unify to go after a guy, Kevin Warren. So Dan, the latest in the Big Ten saga, now obviously the Big Ten came back. The ruling that you and I have not had a chance to speak about on the podcast, which I wanted to get your thoughts on an administrative level. We know that the Big Ten struggles mightily with votes, right? When you have 14 people that are supposed to vote, and then 3 of them leave the room and they say, we're not sure if we voted, it was unclear if we voted, and then someone submits a sworn affidavit that all 14 of them voted. We know that they don't really know what a vote is at this point. No, last week, Nebraska tried to play Chattanooga. They tried to schedule a game outside of the conference. When the Big Ten agreed to return, one of the conditions, 2 that I think are interesting for purposes of this conversation. One, if you had a positive COVID test, you could not play for a minimum of 21 days. So it didn't matter, right? Like we've seen in football, baseball, any other sport. If you test positive and then you have 3 negatives, it's just a matter of your comfortability to get onto the court or the field or whatever it is. But in theory, you could return to action in a week. If you're not manifesting symptoms, you have negative tests. Not the case in the Big Ten. Big Ten's a mandatory 21-day minimum. The other one, Dan, I wanted to get your thoughts on as it's popping up more and more frequently with more games being canceled this week, including Maryland and Ohio State. The rule that essentially does not allow you to reschedule games out of the conference. So Wisconsin was supposed to play Nebraska about 2 weeks ago. Wisconsin had a COVID outbreak to no fault of Nebraska. Nebraska went to the Big Ten and they said, hey guys, we know you have no idea what a vote is, but can you please vote and see if we're allowed to play Chattanooga? And for some reason, the Big Ten said, well, no, Nebraska, we hate you and you can't reschedule games against people outside the conference. I'm paraphrasing. They didn't say we hate you. They said, like, we really don't like you. They also didn't say that. But the point being, they didn't allow them to schedule an out-of-conference game. So it's one thing for Nebraska, which is 0-2. We're going nowhere fast, my adopted Cornhuskers. But, Dan, for a team like Ohio State, they need to have a certain mandatory minimum of games, you'd think, to get into the real, college football playoff. You can't be 5-0 and be in the college football playoff. Then, in which case, maybe if you're a 10-1 team or 9-1 team, that's more impressive than being 5-0. So, Dan, I kind of bring it to you with this. What do you think, just on an administrative level, from a kind of a high level, what do you think if Ohio State, right, if they have another COVID outbreak, one of their opponents can't play, if Ohio State goes to the Big Ten and they ask to be to have a non-conference opponent, do you think that the Big Ten has any reason for reversing its prior precedent?
Well, I think this is such a bizarre scenario. Anyone who follows, big time college football or college athletics or college basketball understands that these games and non-conference, all this stuff is etched in stone. This is not like choosing up 3 at the schoolyard, 3-on-3 basketball. It's not quite as pliable as just, this school had to cancel. Can we slot in Fresno State? That's not how it works. And I understand the Big Ten's reluctance to do things. Now we have to understand the context here. You're focusing on votes and the legitimacy of who was in the room. This is a pandemic. These students, and I've said this time and again, most of them will never come near an NFL stadium unless they buy a ticket. 2 years ago, Nebraska
I knew you were going to say that. That was an off year in the program, Dan.
Yeah. 2 years ago, Nebraska had a grand total of 0 players drafted in the NFL.
Low blow.
0. So, you talk about the economic, how we all need we take college football as almost like a birthright, a given. We're entitled to it. But these players, for the most part, are never going to get anywhere near the NFL. They don't receive compensation. It's not like NFL players who make a conscious choice through their bargaining unit to play a season, and they're highly compensated, and they assume the risk. What of collegiate players who receive no compensation whatsoever, no hazard pay, but no pay at all, stepping into the cauldron of these contagion petri dishes, where the president of Notre Dame tests positive, the student body,
the entire student body tested positive. I have to,
yeah, the student body, runs onto the field at the conclusion of the Clemson game. There are positive tests in large pockets all over the place, and all we're caring about is like, how do we reschedule the game? I think it's insanity that we've even had this to begin with.
Well, so I'll push back on you a little bit, because I mean, obviously, if anybody's on Twitter, like, you could say, like today, for example, I said, if we didn't have this crazy 21-day rule, this crazy out of conference rule, that Ohio State could schedule really, obviously not going to schedule a game with Alabama on 3 days notice, but they could schedule a fun game this weekend, right? And for the players that already have a truncated season, they could have a game. So I didn't say anything about coronavirus. I didn't say anything about the pandemic. I just said they could schedule a game. There will be people, and it's fine. I'm not going to say that people can't have an opinion, but Dan, at a certain point, sports are an escape for all of us. And I will say, on a geopolitical level, societal level, what always has brought people together for the history of time is like the fine arts, be it music, be it theater, be it entertainment, or sports. So, I mean, there obviously will be some people that want to use sports to divide people for whatever reason, but I don't know. I think it's a healthy escape that we could have a conversation about when a game should be played. It's meant to be an escape, right? It doesn't have to be such a, the same old stuff that we deal with in our everyday chaos. No?
Yeah, I mean, the Clemson Notre Dame game is a fine example of the best of college football. I mean, it's a game that I'll remember for a long, long, long time. But the conditions under which the collegiate players are playing these games leaves a lot to be desired. I mean, a lot of normalcy has returned supposedly back to sports, but let's look at even a conference like this. You and I are on the conference circuit on Zoom. No one is having in-person sports and entertainment symposiums because it's not really safe to do so. Dan, we're doing this remotely.
Dan, I'm in the safety of my library. You're at Madison Square Garden right now. Okay, so can't really.
So, I'm pushing back against the notion that the Big Ten has done anything wrong. Tell me, is Tom Mars or Dan Lust, where are you guys going to be in a couple of years when some of these players develop, potentially some of these players develop some long-term, medical conditions that have a proximate cause tie back to playing during the pandemic? Where's Tom? What is Tom Mars going to do then? Is he?
If it's a fair comment, my whole position is this, and I am not. If you're not going to hear me say it, because I just my view is player empowerment from the professional level to the college level. I'm not putting a gun to anyone's head and say play or not play. But if you can go to war at the age of 18, right? Like if you can have a drink at the age of 21, if you're a 22-year-old college senior, you should be able to make a decision of whether or not you want to play. And particularly, Dan, like we saw in the Nebraska players lawsuit, the Pittsburgh Steelers GM, I'm just stating facts. He said that he's more likely to draft a player that played in this last year than one that didn't play. So if I'm a bubble guy, right? If I'm in Nebraska Cornhuskers, the great, fantastic, soon to be top 5, top 1 Nebraska Cornhuskers, maybe I want to play my senior year because I've worked my entire life, all 22 years of my life, in order to play professional football. So maybe that's a risk I want to assume, Dan. And to be fair, right? You and I have talked about this in a previous podcast. The asbestos litigation that came out of the World Trade Center attacks, for 3-4 years, no one knew what was going to come of it. But for every World Trade Center attack, right, there's Ebola, or there's like, the swine flu, where it's a whole lot of nothing. So, I mean, I think it's fair for the players to decide. If it was my daughter, Dan, happy belated birthday to my daughter. Thank you for saying happy birthday to her.
Nope, don't mention it.
You did
My
not.
pleasure. That's awesome. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to her.
You forgot. But No, but the point is,
Well, I've had my head around some other,
fair.
issues.
The point being, if it's my
Next
kid,
year.
I'm not sure, but for an adult, if you're 19 years old, you're 18 years old, I don't see a problem with letting them decide. But you want to put one more bow on it, then we'll switch to our third topic.
Well, yeah. I mean, I felt this way a month and a half ago when things had calmed down, nationally around some of the COVID reporting. But now some of the projections, forecasts, and the actual numbers, positive tests, deaths. I mean, they're setting records now, and I know we all need escapes. But it's easier to say that when it's someone else's health that's being placed at risk. And sometimes the adults in the room, the president team, the school presidents, the conferences, provosts, they have to make decisions, to kind of protect, because that's their name, it's their school. The students don't run the school. The school runs the school. The team president, the board of trustees, they're the ones who make the decisions. If Trevor Lawrence, if he was denied the right to play college football, maybe they should let him, play somewhere else. But I guarantee you, NFL quality draft eligible players, they're going to get drafted, and if they're not drafted, they're going to get tryouts, and if they're any good, they're going to make it. And it's not the value of the first contract; it's the value of your second contract. And I think the reticence to draft a player because he missed the entire season due to COVID is somewhat overblown. And I admit, if it causes someone to slide from the first round to the second or the third round, that's where it makes a difference. But over the long time horizon of an NFL career, the cream does rise to the top, to use a wrestling expression.
Did you just quote Macho Man Randy Savage?
Yeah.
Pretty confident. Okay, so let's.